Insert retard minutes. It's CG woo-woo time. That's really sexy. It's CG woo-woo time. That's really sexy. It's CG woo-woo time. That's really sexy. And hopefully it leads to me having lots of sex. Welcome to CG Woo-Woo, the show that showcases the weird, the Fortean, the outre, the Comicsgate adjacent, the Fandom Menace adjacent, and whatever the fuck else I decide is cool. I am your host, John XD, or whatever the fuck else I'm deciding to call myself today. And today is going to be a very CG and comics and Fandom Menace adjacent episode. Okay, on this edition of CG Woo-Woo, we are going to get into the CG and particularly the Fandom Menace side of this Fortiana, because I have just watched the entire 3 seasons of The Mandalorian, and I've also in the process of completing this season of WandaVision. And I'm going to give my commentary on it. I'm going to point out some of the tropes and Fortiana that's in it, and then I'm going to give my critique of some of the things, because I've known a lot of the things about The Mandalorian and WandaVision just by osmosis through, reviews and things that I've heard. But until recently, I haven't seen them just because I refuse to support Disney. I mean, Disney was dead to me long before they pulled this crap with Gina Carano, and I do stand behind her, and I totally supported the boycott of Disney when they committed tortious interference and fired her for a post that she made on social media. But I am going to get into some of the meat of that. But anyway, to explain why all of a sudden now I watched it was because unbeknownst to me, my wife got like the special $1.99 discount trial for Disney Plus, and it's basically a trial period where it's $1.99 and you watch everything but with commercials. But I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up in the 80s, so that doesn't bother me as much as it bothers some people. But so I figure, well, you already gave money to the devil, so the deed's been done, so I might as well watch The Mandalorian, which I've been wanting to watch for years. And I also was curious about WandaVision. And I might not have time to get into it for this episode, but I'm also going to be reviewing Moon Knight. Okay, to get into The Mandalorian, loved it. I mean, the young Star Wars nerd in me from the 1980s was spurging out, off the charts when I was watching it. The kid in me who loved Star Wars decades before, PC was a thing, decades before, wokeism was a thing, decades before SJWs even existed, and Star Wars was Star Wars. The kid that loved that back then really loved The Mandalorian. And although I was very, it was unfortunate to see that Gina Carano's character, Cara Dune, wasn't in season 3, at least they left the door open. They didn't kill her off. So I'm glad that they did that. I hope that someday cooler heads will prevail, and we get an opposite effect of a new pharaoh came who knew not Joseph. Let's hope that a new pharaoh comes who knows not Darth Menopause. Or maybe our real life superhero Elon Musk can get her job back. That would be fucking tits. And for a comeback scene, I think that there should be a scene where Cara Dune is like in a cage match and pummeling a bunch of pudgy, whiny soy boys. That would be awesome. There was some obvious content in it that made me roll my eyes, but, what's to expect with the times and everything wasn't as bad as, the debacle that was The Last Jedi or, yeah, but anyway. Another thing that I saw was I finally saw the Rise of Skywalker, the last of the fan fiction Disney Star Wars trilogy, and I will say it was a lot better than the Last Jedi. And I will say that, before I even found out about the Phantom Menace or even Comicsgate, I watched The Last Jedi and I just said, wow, this is dead to me. And I just stopped caring about Star Wars, and that's why I haven't seen The Rise of Skywalker until now. Until, found out that my wife gave $1.99 to the devil, so hey, like I said, the deed's been done. I did like it, and even though, when I heard the plot at first, when I heard, they brought back Palpatine and everything was sort of slapdash and all of the criticisms that everyone was giving, and they were valid criticisms, but it wasn't as cringe as I thought it was going to be. The way they put it together, I thought it was good. There was sort of an undead horror element, with Palpatine being resurrected, and he quoted the line that he gave to Anakin when he was wooing him over to the dark side in the Clone Wars movies, where he was saying, there are paths in the dark side that some would consider unethical or unconventional, and it was talking about this mad scientist, black magic Sith occult thing, resurrecting the dead, and it did have a bit of a crossover into Lovecraftiana. It was very reminiscent of the case of Charles Dexter Ward with the mad scientist lab and all the dead things that were in the containers and in the pits in Charles Dexter Ward's dungeon. Back to The Mandalorian, I really love the whole story arc with the history of Mandalore and how the original Mandalore came from another system, and how it started out as a religion, and then over time it just they actually became a people, a race, when they started out as a religion, and that the traditional ones, the trad Mandalores, so to speak, were the ones that wore the helmets, and they were the ones that still held to it as a religion, whereas the ones who didn't wear the helmets all the time were the Mandalorians, who were actually from the planet and identified as a race, as a people. And so the whole story arc of them coming back together and learning from each other and taking back their planet even after it had been decimated. There were still pockets of life, and they were able to go to their holiest site, and they were able to go to the Forge. And I thought that was really, really cool. And the actress who played the heiress to the throne of Mandalore, the actress who played Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica, she was just great. I really like that actress. Then I also found the dialogue between Bill Burr and Pedro Pascal really interesting when they had hijacked that mining tank and they were transporting that really volatile material, and they had the pirates chasing them. Before all of that happened, Bill Burr was sort of, you could tell that was probably his either ad lib or addition to the script, because he was sort of calling out Mando on some of his trad bullshit. And being a trad myself, I can tell you that there are many of us who are full of shit, and unfortunately, I'm full of shit about a lot of things. And people have called me on my hypocrisy before, but Bill Burr did a little bit of that because, of course, if you listen to some of Bill Burr's comedy, which I enjoy, he talks about, growing up a Catholic and, coming from a traditional Irish Catholic family. And so, sort of him calling out Pedro Pascal's character out on his some of his trad bullshit about how he bellyaches about how he can't show his face, but is it that he can't ever take off his helmet, or he can't ever show his face? And he says, you see how you're kind of playing fast and loose with that when it's convenient for you. You can tell that that's sort of like someone who grew up Catholic and sort of criticizes some of the hypocrisy that he perceived growing up. But I thought that whole dialogue was really interesting. I also really liked Giancarlo Esposito's character of Moff Gideon. He played such a great villain in that series. And I really love that actor. He was great in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and I've seen him in a lot of really good stuff, and he was really great in this one. And when he called in the Dark Troopers, those giant robotic, brutish, Darth Vader looking stormtroopers, they reminded me so much of Baron Karza from the Micronauts. If any of you were kids, growing up in the late 70s, there were these toys called the Micronauts, and they're big collector's items, but they had a character called Baron Karza who looked a lot like those Dark Troopers. And the thing about Baron Karza is he came with a horse, and with the Micronauts they had these magnetic limbs that you could take off and rearrange and interchange with different characters. And with Baron Karza, you could make him into a centaur. You could take his horse's head off, and then you could take his legs off and put him on his horse and make him into a centaur. But anyway, he looked a lot like those Dark Troopers. Baron Karza, look it up on Google. It's if I still had that toy, it would probably be worth a lot of money. Also, in the scene where Mando and Grogu go down to the waters beneath the forge on Mandalore, so he can be redeemed and wash himself in those waters. He's kidnapped by this cybernetic. It sort of looks like a more degenerate, more slapdash version of Count Dooku, only sort of a little gremlin, barely like an eyeball, and something organic floating around inside like this little glass scope, and it fits itself onto larger and smaller looking machines that are very reminiscent of that movie 9. That was a great movie, but if you recall, like the big land leviathan type robots that turned into spiders or snakes or whatever, and they had sort of that red light on them, it reminded me a lot of that when it kidnapped Mando and put it in that rusty cage thing, and then the Mandalorian, the heiress to the throne, had to go and rescue him and ended up getting the dark saber back, and so that's how she ended up, rightfully having the saber that would fulfill her destiny. So that was cool as well, because that reminded me of the movie 9, which I thought was an awesome movie. Big fan of that film. I've seen it multiple times. And I'm the type of person that doesn't really like to watch movies more than once, even if I like them. They have to be just knockout all-time classics, like the Star Wars movies or the Lord of the Rings movies. I've seen those movies so many times I couldn't even tell you how many times I've seen them. The Terminator, that's another one. The original Terminator. but yeah. This is Amanda Bergoglio telling you trads you gotta take off of your helmets. You're embarrassing to me, you gotta become a more modern. There is no way no more. Now, WandaVision. I really like the David Lynch sort of feel to it. There's like this thin veneer of, this perfect Americana, almost actually a sitcom parody of perfect Americana, and it's just a thin veneer, and underneath is something very dark and very awry, and often occult and supernatural. That's very, very reminiscent of David Lynch's work, and I'm a huge fan of David Lynch. Even the '86 Dune movie, I was all in, And I'm going to say this now because in my generation you could say this without getting called a simp, but goddamn, Michelle Olsen has grown into quite a beautiful woman. And if you want to call me a simp, call me a simp. I'm an old man, and I'm a grandfather, and I'm married. But I thought it was hilarious when I was listening to Sleazy P. Martini's podcast, and he was reading aloud something that someone wrote, and it was just hilarious. He says, "Did you know that simp is the new word that Skittles use to describe straight people?" And yeah, you call someone a simp just because they say they like a girl. You're Skittles and Spurgs. I think it's a psychosis of being a millennial. I mean, not to pick on the millennials, but to pick on them. I mean, you guys realize that your generation is never going to live this woke thing down. I mean, the debacle shit show that is the 20s. They're roaring, all right, but anyway, I mean that is going to be the hallmark. The crown that defines your generation, and it's pretty wretched. But anyway, one of my favorite people in the whole world is millennials, so what can I tell you? And there are some very base trads among the millennials, like there are among the Zoomers. So, just like there are a bunch of fucktards among my generation, we're fucktards in different ways. But I didn't really want to get into a generational analysis, so we're going to shift gears and get back to the Fortiana. This is some very dark magic that the Scarlet Witch is using in WandaVision, because she's basically enslaving thousands of people and making them suffer just so she can, keep the illusion of having her dead husband back. And that's extremely dark, and the amount of power that she has to expend to do this. It's basically a series about a very powerful black magician. And having really immersed myself into Disney and what they're putting out in pop culture since this whole woke debacle broke out, I've pretty much been steering clear of it, because I very rarely hate watch something. The only thing I really recall hate watching was the ridiculous Amazon Lord of the Rings series. I thought that was horrible, but I admit that I hate watched every episode, because the Lord of the Rings geek in me was, holding out to find, some snippet of something that was good, and it really sucked. Oh, and I want to say this, the very first scene in the Lord of the Rings fan fiction Amazon series, the very first scene, the creature they encounter is an ice troll, and it's like this giant, white, shaggy, abominable snowman with ram horns. It's like, oh, the very first scene, the very first creature you encounter is the Hoth Wampa. Wow, that's really original, guys. Yeah, only this time the Mary Sue kicks the Hoth Wampa's ass, without having to be strung up on a spit and in the middle of a mutiny of all of her comrades. Yeah, great writing. And she didn't even have telekinesis powers. All she had to do was have the power of the Mary Sue. Luke was riding on the back of a tauntaun, so his energy was saved up a little bit. And, all these elves had just... climbed a CGI mountain that looked higher and more deadly than the Himalayas, but they were still they still had enough wind in them to do battle and cause a mutiny and kick the Hoth Wampa's ass. It's like, whatever. Yeah, and you could say, oh, well, they're Elvises. They've got, immortal stamina. That's why Aragorn wanted to risk everything, for what's her name, for Steven Tyler's daughter. He's been, tapping that immortal cooch that never tires out and, never needs some revagination. So, yeah, of course he's going to risk everything when he's hitting that. Okay, that's the end of my little impromptu rant about the Lord of the Rings fanfic. But back to the other things, WandaVision. Back to my original thought, having immersed myself in this, in what Disney's been putting out in pop culture for the first time in a very long time, because, I have an adult daughter who's almost 30 now, so, I have, grandbabies and everything, so it's been a while since I've had to immerse myself in Disney pop culture for anything. When I had a little girl, I watched it even if it was hokey as shit, because she loved it. And I started to wrinkle up my nose like I'd smelled something foul and unholy from Disney even before they really pushed this indoctrination of degeneracy among children. And they've been doing it for a very long time. I mean, there are a few things that I've caught, going back 30 and 40 years that were really, really bad. But it hasn't been amped up to the point where people are just openly, preaching cultural and dialectical Marxism just for the purpose of finding a platform to do it. And the comic book genre and the fans and the story and the franchise and everything that the creators and the fans have built up and loved over the years has just been trampled underfoot for the purpose of using it for a platform for, quite frankly, the worst people on earth, and or proxies for the worst people on earth, rather. Communism is a cult, which is why it has to indoctrinate people with a dialectic, and they have an apocalyptic worldview of bringing about the end of history, when there is the Soviet man and there can be a worker's paradise with no government, which is, a complete utopian fantasy, and it's been the justification for the absolute worst and most monstrous acts of mass murder and genocide that the history of planet Earth has ever known in our recorded history. The 20th century was a very dark, evil time, and it murdered a lot of people, to the tune of millions. And the 21st century are unfortunately the chickens coming home to roost. The evil empire, and guess who I'm talking about, is slowly imploding on itself, and the shitstorm that's going to happen in the wake of that, I just pray that it doesn't get really, really, really bad, like I said. But it's kind of like an analogy on a smaller scale when you think of like the organized crime, the mafia. There was a case where maybe 40 years ago, one of the mob bosses in my city like died peacefully in a retirement home, and because of the vacuum that created, all of the old power balance, it was up for grabs, and so several people ended up getting taken out just because an old man peacefully died, in a retirement home. And just think of it on a larger scale. We've got the biggest gangster and terrorist on the entire planet. The most powerful empire on the entire planet that isn't afraid to drop nuclear weapons on people and has demonstrated so. It's slowly imploding on itself, and the vacuum that's going to create. I just hope it doesn't get really messy and really nasty, and we just need to hope and pray for the people we love. And as a caveat to what I just said, let me be clear that I'm not happy about any of this. I love my country and I love my nation, what's left of it, but unfortunately we have a population who has been raised for generations now to hate themselves, and I don't know if I hope we have enough people left to hold on to our nationhood. But anyway, I've gotten into the weeds a little, but that doesn't matter because, hey, that's how I do it. I play fast and loose. I'm a trad. I've got lots of practice. Another movie I watched on Disney Plus that was a Marvel superhero movie was Werewolf by Night. I really enjoyed it. I wasn't familiar with the comic book or the graphic novel from before, but I'm definitely going to check it out now. People who were fans of the original one, I'm sure there's all kinds of critiques that they could throw into it, but I really, really enjoyed that story, and I like the whole, 1930s Universal classic horror film vibe and aesthetic that it had. I really thought that was nice, and I was surprised to see the Man-Thing in it, the Marvel knockoff of the Swamp Thing, so that was cool too. And I also liked the Universal Studios version of the werewolf that they used because it was more anthropomorphic than the more whimsical or fantastical horror ones that we see in Underworld. Not saying I don't like that because I love those. I love that look even back with The Howling and American Werewolf in London when I was a kid. But there is something to be said for the more anthropomorphic one because given the right vibe and the right atmosphere, you can really, really add to the horror element by making the creature more anthropomorphic, so it gets into that uncanny valley region where it's a little more disturbing, where something looks just human enough for you to realize that's not a human. That's there's an uncanny valley look that's creepy with dolls. There's an uncanny look that's creepy with androids and robots and effigies and automatons and all kinds of things. So when you can find that sweet spot and play on that for a horror element, that's really good. And to dovetail back to a thought that I didn't finish a little earlier, like I said, I started to hate Disney, years before they started with this woke nonsense. But I just hated them because of what they did to popular music. Because my daughter's generation grew up listening to Radio Disney type stuff and watching music videos performed by Disney Channel child stars who really didn't have any musical or recording talent. They were just being showcased because they were kid actors. And kids grew up listening to this really campy, banal sort of Disney fake music, and it really did have a very deleterious effect on popular music, because look at it now, it's horse shite. Yeah, when it's all electronica and when it's what are they called? Back to WandaVision. I also thought it was really interesting how they used the X-Men film version of Quicksilver to tie in with the Avengers. Wanda, who obviously her brother was killed, and it's interesting how they sort of tried to reconcile those two timelines. But I always thought that was kind of confusing with the whole thing about the characters in the X-Men movie universe wasn't owned by the same people who owned the film rights to the Marvel Studios universe until just recently. They were all requisitioned and added together. Now they're doing little mashup things like this. But I thought it was kind of interesting because I do like that actor. I've seen him in American Horror Story before, and he's a really good actor. And by the way, if y'all really want to do a deep dive into all the evils of Disney and cult roots and all the little symbolisms and things that they, all the, look here, I'm talking like an idiot, all the symbolism that they put into it, I would suggest listening to Jay Dyer's work and also the work of his wife, Jamie Hanshaw, Hanshaw. She also has a YouTube channel, and she has a show on there called Out of This World, where she does some deep dives into the dangers and evils of Disney. So if you wanna go down the rabbit hole even further, then you can you can check out the people who have really done their research. Oh, Satan, I want my $1.99 back. Yeah, I've been wanting for as long as I can remember. When I get a little extra lutefisk, I've got to run and spend her. Whenever I try to save the fur-haired maiden, come and take it, saying, maybe things will get a little better in the morning. Maybe things will get a little better in the morning. Put your lutefisk to the fjord. What do you get? Fjordy lutefisk. Yeah. Do you know what I did to that fucking hog that chased me into the electrical fence? I fed it a whole jar of peanut butter so it couldn't bite me while I was punching him in the nose. Punching him in the big old flat pig snout. Fucker. Going down the highway, going 64, Johnny let a big one and blew me out the door. The wheels couldn't take it, the engine fell apart, all because of Johnny's supersonic fart. And you know what I did to that fucker who didn't have the common courtesy to tell us we was standing in ground zero of his ass cloud? I fucking fed him a whole jar of peanut butter so he couldn't bite me while I was punching him in his fucking nose.